morning we are journeying through God's diversity. We only know God through God's diverse creation and children, and we learn more about God in this, and we learn more about ourselves as well. And so this Sunday, we have a very special guest, Cristobal, who will be bringing the Word of God to us. He's from Immigrant Solidarity DuPage, which does amazing work for those who are not documented in our area and the most vulnerable. And so I would like to thank him for being here and bringing the Word for us. And he will also be available afterwards to just talk to him, to ask him more about what he does. So thank you, Cristobal.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
If we could turn to our Bible to John 3:8.
They're in the pews. These are physical values.
If not, I have it here. So
Yeah, you can read it.
the wind blows wherever it wants. You hear it whistle, even though you ignore where it comes from and where it's going. The same happens with everything that's born of the Spirit. Now, as Pastor Maureen noted, I'm from Immigrant Solidarity DuPage. We're an immigration group that started in 2007 in Wheaton. We started the group because we knew that migration is and always has been. Reading about Abraham this morning in the Bible being called out of his land for something greater. Thinking about our ancestors that came from other lands to come for something greater. We think during this Lenten time of all the people in the world right now that are traveling, looking for something greater, leaving lands of war, leaving lands of poverty. In Central America, leaving lands that have been ravished by revolutions, ravished by reactionary policy that has affected people, causing poverty, causing hunger, causing despair. And the issue of migration has always been, and is today, part of God's plan. We can't have, if we think today the genetic analysis that's coming out across the world, that people are going and checking their DNA, seeing where they come from, and seeing how mixed we all are. They're seeing how nations, my ancestors came from Spain, how many people came together in migrations to form that land. How many people came together to form England? How many people came together right here in the United States? And it's always been the forces in the Bible, we've mentioned the Pharisees this morning, that always seek to create the divisions, that always seek to create the pure, the Jews and the Gentiles, the barbarians and the Greeks, whatever you have it here. And how we as believers have always had a special responsibility, where the forces of the world have always seek to divide. It's always been the Christian that's come in, that seek to unite, that in spite of what's been said by the governments, that's in spite of what's coming out from the kings or from the pharaohs or whatnot, that it's always been the Christian in Rome, when people were dying of the plague and the pagans wouldn't touch the people that were sick. It was the Christians that came on and took them in. If we think, I just saw a couple of days ago, there was a case of ICE. As we know, ICE is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement that for the Latino community has been a true terror for at least the past 10 years. We saw a case of a group of church folk where ICE was surrounding a van, and a group of church folk got together holding hands and singing Amazing Grace, blocking ICE from taking the people away. This is the gospel in action. And this Lenten season, as we think about the sufferings, the passion of Christ going into to be crucified, and all of the mistreatment and the misjustice that there was here, that I always think, and especially in the past few years, what Easter really is, what the celebration becomes. And thinking right now, we always come right now knowing, reflecting on the passion of Christ and what he did for us in his beating, in his going, getting ready to go to be crucified here. That he did it all, always with the understanding of a new promise and a new covenant. Again, I go back to Abraham leaving. He was completely from a completely different land. But God saw his righteousness here. And he was called out to a new land, to do a new thing. When Moses was born in Egypt, and his people were in subjugation. Moses had no idea that he was going to be called to break out of the land, to do a new thing. And he did it. I think of St. Paul and all of the journeys of St. Paul across the Mediterranean, going and creating new communities here, creating new covenants where there was nothing, where there was brutal governments here that are non-democratic, creating a new Christian community. And in that community, democracy, love, charity, and solidarity. And we think right now in what we're trying to do in this area. My parents came here to pick cucumbers. They were cucumber pickers. They came here in the 60s to Dansville, if anyone knows a little bit, south of Joliet. They were farm workers here, completely by accident. My father, he was from northern Mexico. They were living happy in northern Mexico. His father decided he wanted to just ditch his family and marry another woman, so he threw everyone to the United States, Welcome to America. we were here by accident. My grandmother was a Native American from Texas, who married a man from Monterrey, from northern Mexico, who came up to the United States just because he was an adventurer. I wanted to see what's going on. That's what they were thinking, but God had other plans, God had other plans when Jonah was wanting to escape. He didn't want to follow God's plan. God had other plans. He intervened and called him here. And in this nation right now, where immigration has been one of the biggest issues here, it's really been the example of the church in so many cases here that has intervened here, and in the best of the cases here, with the principles always. We have the principles here. And we as believers, we often forget that this world, if we're going to change this world, it's a question of the principles, of righteousness here, of going out there with the prophetic voice here, and saying, as Pastor Mo often says, showing radical love in action, showing the Christ in action. What does Christ look like in Lombard? What does Christ look like walking through during this Lenten season, walking through DuPage County? And I think being born in the community that I was, I was a college kid that was, I wanted to go on and, find a good job like everyone else. But I was called in my heart to go out and do something for the least of these. Just by the fact that I spoke Spanish and I heard what was going on. Once when I was in college, I was just, just doing my studies and partying and whatnot here. And one of my neighbors told me, my husband is going to be deported next week. What can you do? And I had to think, I'm 21 years old. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? But I knew at that moment that there was a knocking at the door, that I had to do something, that I couldn't just devote my life to, as everyone else was, to go and get a good job and just check out, in my suburban reality. But God was calling me to do something different here in Immigrant Society Page, forming this group. Since the start of the group, we've fought against about 300 deportations in the area, including one we're fighting right now. And what is it? I think that we hear the word deportations and we just think, it happens, there's people that have done bad things, malos hombres, so what do they say, bad men. But I've seen the fact of the deportations. We're fighting right now, just actually yesterday, a case that came to us, of a man who is he's 45 years old, and immigration just sent him a letter that's saying he is to be deported and he has to leave at the end of April. He's got a wife and he's got a child who's a citizen here. So he's 45 and they're charging him for something, a DUI that happened when he was 20, yeah? So they're going back and knocking at his door for something that he's done. He's since, after 25 years ago, he's a totally different person. He goes to church, he's a believer, he's active in the community here. But immigration is knocking at his door. And he's got the issue to leave the country at the end of April. Before we existed, nothing would have been done. It was just been, we're going to let this family break up. The wife is going to stay here. The husband's going to go back. The child is going to be terrorized. He's an 8-year-old kid, that his father is going to be gone. But through the Spirit of God, and through the dignity and the decency that we recognize in every single human being, every single person here, but particularly the most vulnerable, and particularly the most poor here, that going in there and intervening here is not only what I have to do, but that's what I urge everyone here to get in and do as well. This is a time right now where it's always been in difficult times, in polarized times. I think of Martin Luther King Jr. coming up. It was illegal. Segregation was legal. It was on the books. The Jim Crow laws were in the books. The marches, a lot of the things that he did in breaking up the segregated cafes and what they did in the freedom rides here, it was all illegal. Yeah, everything that he did was illegal in a lot of ways. But through the principles of God and the prophetic voice that calls on justice for the oppressed and breaking the captives free, and the last being first and the first being last here, Martin Luther King rose up, and with that prophetic voice here, he brought people on board because people believed what he believed. And what did he believe? In the eternal principles that have always guided the best of humanity: solidarity, compassion, love. You think of St. Paul calling about the fruits of the Spirit, that everything when St. Paul was writing was under attack. There was a repressive governments that were out to get you. It was illegal in many cases to be even a Christian here. But what guided St. Paul in those days were the fruits of the Spirit here: the love, the joy, the peace, the compassion, the understanding, the solidarity here. And this is exactly what us in the church need to do. A lot of people have checked out of the church. I was having conversations, I have a lot of 20-somethings that I know. I'm a teacher, and I talk to them, and they just tell me, I don't like to see hypocrisy, so I don't go. I don't like to see people doing one thing and saying another, so I don't go. I don't like to see what's been done to Christianity here, where when I think of Christianity here, I immediately think of people that are against, that people that are angry, that people are against whatever we're for, with this rigidity, with this dogmatism here. People have completely checked out of the church here. But it's exactly this time in church history, 2020, guided by the principles and guided by the love. We have to go out there. And just as Abraham did, coming in to the new land, we have to create the new covenant. Because as we see in this world today, this globalized world, where there's people all over the world from everywhere, in London, Paris, even in China, you see people from all over the place. And my nephew is a missionary in Africa right now, and he said there's Europeans from all over in Africa, yeah? And he was eating pizza. This world is different here. This world is, in a way, it's God's plan to bring everybody together here. And not bringing everybody together. St. Augustine once said that the death and resurrection of Christ is a happy accident. And I think in a way we see what might just seem coincidental. I live in Wheaton. I have a neighbor from Africa, a neighbor from Mexico, a neighbor that came here from Ireland, 70 years ago. We're all just kind of here. And you would think, and I think a lot of government forces try to say it's just an accident here. There's people out to get what you have. There's people out to take what you got. It's a time right now to put up these walls, to put up these barriers here, to put up these barriers in the mind here. But it's exactly our prerogative to do something different by loving the neighbor. It said that in the original text in the Bible, loving your neighbor, being a neighbor was a verb. It wasn't just, you're my neighbor and I love you. God bless you. How are you this morning? But it's stepping in. It's creating a new path. It's creating a new pathway. And just like the Good Samaritan that went out of his way when there was a case of injustice here, he went out of his comfort zone. He could have just kept walking, I've seen injustices happen and people just keep walking, It's not my deal. I don't have any skin in the game. But it's entering right here. And particularly where there is the cases of injustice, where there is oppression here, as we know from the Old Testament, God is always present in times of trouble. God has never failed. in the times of the trouble. And it's us as believers intervening in these moments here, the best that we can. And particularly in the suburbs, I think we have in the suburbs, it's been said that a new spirituality comes up because it's a spirituality that's been of apathy, a spirituality of complacency, a spirituality where, I just do my own thing and I live in the suburban zone and I buy things on Amazon and I have a happy life. But we don't see what's going on around us. I've given a privileged position to understand the immigrant community coming from parents that came here from other places here. And I knew that loving my neighbor in this case had to be radical interventions, going out there, breaking up these deportations, answering the phone when there's a crisis here, doing the best that we can on a very limited budget. And if you have a nonprofit organization, it's a super limited. Churches know that very well. Picking up that phone. But it's only through these acts that in this time here, new pathways can be created. And as these new pathways be created, whereas the powers that be are calling for division, are calling for the purity, are calling for the patriotism here, it's exactly the Christianity of internationalism, of love, of acceptance, of compassion here, and not just in the heart here. It's been said that justice is love in action. It's the quest for justice out here, for our homeless brothers and sisters, for our immigrant brothers and sisters, for the poor and the oppressed here. There's a special blessing here when you lift up the oppressed. There's a special blessing here when the vulnerable are lifted up here, because Christ is there among them. And as you're lifting them up, you're lifting yourself up, and you're making Christ be glorified among us. So in this Lenten season, let's think right now that Christ, of the face of Christ, Mother Teresa once said, in every suffering person that I see, I go the extra mile because I see Christ in their face. I see Christ in the suffering, in the poor, in the leper. Christ is right there. And what I'm doing for this person here that's suffering, the greatest need here, I'm doing it exactly for Christ himself here, in building them up. So this Lenten season, if we could think of the immigrant right now, of this case right now, it's been said that troops are being mobilized all over to sanctuary cities, to Illinois, which we have the Trust Act, where was signed by Governor Pritzker that the police cannot do immigration work here. We're seeing troops start to come to Illinois from ICE to safeguard our cities from these illegal aliens, these people that they try to paint as hordes, as these caravans that are coming out here. It's our job to go in here and humanize these people and take the rhetoric and get off the lies here and lift them up as men and women made in the image of God, that have a dignity and a decency here, and that if no one else is going to recognize it here, or if the government is not going to recognize it, or if the forces are not going to recognize it, or different groups are not going to recognize it, that we are going to recognize it here, and we're going to create this new communion here, and we're going to create this new love, and it's from here that the New Jerusalem is born. Because as the Bible says very clearly in the book of John, the harvest is deep and vast, and it's right here among us right now. We don't have to wait for the next world. That harvest is right here, right now, but the workers are few. And what would it look like if we are working in that harvest? And what does that harvest mean? I like to imagine that harvest means that Christ's kingdom is right here and right now, and that kingdom exists, and that kingdom is visible and evident here in our acts of building up the oppressed, of setting the captives free, of liberation, of the process of liberation and liberatory acts here, of any oppressed in our community here. The salvation of theirs is our salvation here. And we have to think, having the kingdom here, our goal here is to liberate that kingdom. And how does that liberate? How do we liberate that kingdom? By taking off the chains and the yokes of oppression here, setting these captives free, coming together as a community like never before here, on the principles, on our values here of love, of compassion, of sacrifice, of going in there here and being a good neighbor. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Amen.